You are listening to the first episode of the Podstard by the Bastard Jack, where I essentially talk about whatever I want to talk about. Why? Because it's my podcast. So every episode I will talk about what I'm interested in talking about that week. This week, I'm going to be talking about Bruce Lee, primarily his book Striking Thoughts, where I will read passages from certain sections. The 3 sections will be on the human being, Yin-Yang, and truth, and also how the extreme left and the extreme right could really learn, especially from Yin-Yang.
I'm in love with the bastard, and I know it sounds strange. Does it hurt when you smile? 'Cause the dirt in your eye.
For my first episode of the Podstard, I want to talk about Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was a martial artist, actor, entrepreneur, and my favorite, a philosopher. Bruce Lee developed Jeet Kune Do, combining philosophy and skills from various martial arts, which actually paved the way for modern-day mixed martial arts, or MMA as it is more commonly referred. I want to talk about, in this episode, more about my favorite side about Bruce Lee, and that is his philosophies. One of my favorite books, which I have read multiple times, is Striking Thoughts. This philosophical book is filled less with the sort of obnoxious paragraph after obnoxious paragraph of pretentious writing, and it's actually more aphorisms that are easier to understand and digest. So aphorisms are concise and memorable expressions of general principles and truths. Bruce Lee had a purpose with his philosophies. When creating his ideas, he wanted to make sure that they were attainable for anyone to grasp, a more broad audience, not just for an elite few who understood more complex language. Because Bruce knew most people could understand grand concepts and grand ideas, even if one could not understand grand verbiage. He wanted the reader to be able to understand and come to their own conclusions and their own thoughts. I'm probably going to talk about Bruce Lee and many other podcasts if I continue this. But today I am going to read passages from Striking Thoughts. As I mentioned earlier, this book was one that I've read quite a few times. I'm going to focus mostly on 3 areas. There's various areas. There's about 72 different sections. But I'm just going to focus on 3 today because I'm sure I will come back to this book. So the 3 I'm going to focus on are the human being, Yin-Yang, and truth. So before I start this, I just want to read a bit of the preface by Bruce Lee's wife, Linda Lee Cardwell. So she writes, I'm just going to read the first 2 paragraphs. Bruce Lee inspired many people. Fans of his movies were dazzled by his physical brilliance. Martial arts practitioners were awed by his deep understanding of the competitive arts, while others found guidance in his underlying philosophy, which wove the spiritual and physical aspects of martial arts together into a way of life. His study of philosophy in college was the springboard of what would become a lifelong exploration of the major thinkers of the world. He did not confine himself to any particular culture or philosophical era. Instead, he collected and avidly studied hundreds of books on all types of philosophy: Eastern, Western, ancient, and modern, in an attempt to glean those tenets that would contribute to his own spiritual growth. There's a few things I like about this passage and these two paragraphs. It says a lot, and it really tells you a lot about Bruce in these first two paragraphs. The first is the fact that when it came to his studies in philosophy in college, he didn't just focus on one particular area. He focused on literally every culture he could get a hold of. He combined both Western and Eastern philosophies, because Bruce himself, he was of both West and East. As we know, he was born in China, but he was also American as well, and he's part Jewish. So yeah, he had a lot in his background, and when I mean American, he had like American blood. Yeah, so that's what I like about, the second paragraph. The first paragraph, it speaks to martial arts. And I know a lot of people who watch UFC or One Championship, and many assume that, it's just fighting, right? However, a true martial artist, they practice a philosophy. Martial arts isn't just about fighting. It's not just about physique and working out. There's a philosophy to it. Most good places to train, they will always incorporate philosophy into their training. So they won't just be teaching you something physical, they'll also be teaching you something mental. And it's great. And that's Bruce Lee was one of the best philosophers and one of the best martial artists. Here's a good example. So the difference between a fighter and a martial artist. You see Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is a fighter. He's not a martial artist. He doesn't practice really anything that martial arts actually teaches in the mental capacity. I'm not going to take away his physical talents, but the way he reacts to a lot of situations, especially being in a position he's in, where he could easily just say to the person, like, dude, I'm rich, piss off, like, I'm better than you, haha. He instead reacts with violence, and he often does. Of anybody, fellow fighters, I'm meaning outside of the ring. If you react violently against an opponent outside of the ring, it's not good. It's unless you're defending yourself, and you're not defending yourself when you're just upset because of someone's words. The person's words aren't physically harming you. So to react in the violent manner that Conor has because of physical words, it shows that he doesn't really practice martial arts. He trains in fighting. He trains in the physical side of it, and he's a fighter. But he himself, he's not a martial artist. Someone who would be a martial artist is someone like George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre, he rarely even trash talked his opponents, even though in that area that's fine, because trash talking each other can just be fun if you're not actually being serious. If you're both in cahoots in a sense, I guess you kind of have to do like a whole WWE wrestling side to it where it's scripted. I mean, the fight might not be in the same way pro wrestling is, but you can at least do that with the pre-fight or the promo just to hype up the fight because you know that people like that sort of thing. But George really didn't even do that either. And like the worst thing he ever said was BJ Penn, when George St. Pierre and BJ Penn fought each other, BJ Penn accused George of greasing up because he said that George was slippery. In my opinion, George is not a very hairy dude. He's pretty smooth already. So any amount of sweat would make that guy slippery. But BJ Penn accused him of greasing up. And George's reaction to it was like, oh, no. He's like, I didn't do that to cheat and get away with it and get under BJ Penn. He's like, I actually paid that guy to kiss him on his way to the ring. So on the way to the ring, BJ Penn got peck on the cheek by some random fan that got through. George obviously didn't pay that fan to do that. But it was just a funny joke that George made. And that was the worst trash talking I've ever heard George St. Pierre do, was joke about how he paid a fan to kiss BJ Penn on the way to the ring so that BJ Penn would lose. Just jokingly. But George tells another story where a lot of people do come up to him and try to fight, and they're like, oh, I'll fight you, yeah. And he sort of just tells them haha, no, yeah. But yes, that is why I like this passage. That was really a long rant to get to that, but yes, I like this passage because these two paragraphs basically show you how much philosophy was a part of Bruce's life. He started as a young boy doing martial arts, so it's been a part of his life essentially since he could remember. So learning about his philosophies is pretty great because he was pretty much a lifelong learner. But yeah, so I'll read you words from Bruce from the introduction. To live in constant process of relating, so come on out of the shell of isolation and conclusion, and relate directly to what is being said. Bear in mind, I seek neither your approval nor to influence you. So, do not make up your mind as to this is this or that is that. I will be more than satisfied if you begin to learn to investigate everything yourself from now on. I love that passage too. It's basically saying, as John Little would write here for the rest in the introduction, what Bruce Lee communicates to you in these pages is for you alone to interpret, and falls solely to you to make of it what you will. I'll say that's sort of the same with this podcast. I'm going to give my opinion, and a lot of it will have as much facts as I know to put into it, because I do try to do as much research as I can before I really form an opinion on stuff. But I'm not perfect. I'm a human, and that's why we're going to start with the human being as well. So I don't want you to take what I say either as some sort of gospel. As Bruce says, I'm satisfied if you begin to learn to investigate everything yourself from now on. Because I have heard so many people give me an opinion on a topic, and I'll debate them, and then I'll finally be like, okay, where are you getting this information from? And they'll be like, oh, my uncle, or my dad's friend told me this. And I'm like, are you okay? My information is from actual credible sources. And you're getting this as an opinion. Did you not investigate what they told you? Because that's what I do. If someone tells me something, I quite often investigate what they're saying. Unless they're saying, actually, even if they say something like, oh, this ice cream's delicious, I won't just take them for their word. I will try the ice cream. And I will determine myself whether it is delicious or not. So you have to do that with everything. All right, so let's go to the first passage. Identify with your humanity. I love that. So that's the first part of the human being. You know how I like to think of myself as a human being. I do too. I am a human. He writes here, the function and duty of a human being. The function and duty of a human being, a quality human being, that is the sincere and honest development of potential and self-actualization. One additional comment. The energy from within and the physical strength from your body can guide you toward accomplishing your purpose in life and to actually act on actualizing your duty to yourself. So basically, in these different passages that Bruce writes about the human being, he's saying that you're constantly changing. And you have to find your potential in yourself and find self-actualization. Because you are constantly changing. So you can't really be like, I don't know who I am when who you are is always different. A lot of people go back in time and they're like, oh, I'm not the same as I was 10 years ago. Well, no, you shouldn't be. Finding who you are is more about finding your self-actualization rather than having these identities that are stagnant. You can't be stagnant. He says here on the nature of human beings. A human being is an eating, sleeping, physically maintaining, reproducing entity. A human being is an entity of feeling. A human being is a creating entity. See, when he talks about reproducing entity, he's not necessarily talking about reproducing more humans. We as humans produce a lot of things. I'm currently reproducing this podcast by creating it. And then he also says a human being is the creative animal. It is the creative ability of a human being that separates him from all other animals. See, it's our ability to think and create that make us people. It's the fact that I'm reading this book right now that makes us human compared to other animals. And I like that he put from all other animals because he's remembering that humans are animals. It's so funny when someone's like, you're an animal. It's like, yeah, you're stating a fact. Is that supposed to be insulting? I'm an animal. I'm an ape. That's what humans are. People are like, we didn't evolve from apes. No, we didn't evolve from apes. We are evolved apes. We're still apes. We're just evolved and we can create shit. So now I'm going to move on to Yin-Yang. Because I've noticed with humans, especially humans lately, that they like to go and live in these extremes quite often. I don't know too many people who really live. It's always one extreme or the other. And that's why I want to talk about yin-yang. Because I think if we focus more on yin-yang in our societies, we might be able to find a better balance instead of having all this constant unrest. So, on yin-yang, yin and yang are two interlocking parts of one whole, each containing within its confines the qualities of its complementaries. Etymologically, the two characters of yin and yang mean darkness and light. The etymology of yang, the yang, whiteness, principle. So the yang principle represents positiveness, firmness, masculinity, sustainability, brightness, day, heat, etc. The etymology of yin. So the yin is blackness. So the yin principle represents negativeness, softness, femininity, instability, darkness, night, coldness, and so forth. Now, when he talks about when he talks about negativeness, that's not technically a bad thing. I mean, think about it. If you're HIV negative, that's a good thing. So you have to remember that certain words might typically have a bad connotation, but sometimes they're just neutral. So negativeness is a neutral term in the sense of yin. So, and that's the same thing with instability. So I know a lot of people will say yin represents femininity, and also that means like negativeness and instability. So, those are bad words to know. That it's not saying women are bad. It's not saying we're inferior. In fact, yin-yang, I shouldn't say yin and yang, but yin-yang is in fact saying that both parts are equal and need each other. And both parts are just as beneficial as the other. And they're both needed. And I'll talk more about that soon. So, the basic theory underlining yin-yang. The basic theory in yin-yang is that nothing is so permanent as never to change. And I spoke earlier about how humans always change. In other words, when activity, yang, reaches the extreme point, it becomes inactivity, and inactivity forms yin. Extreme inactivity will, in the same way, return to become activity, which is yang. Activity then is the cause of inactivity and vice versa. This system of complementary increasing and decreasing of the principle is continuous. From this, one can see that the two forces yin-yang, although they appear to conflict, in reality are mutually interdependent. Instead of opposition, there is cooperation and alternation. So yeah, I want to talk about this. So I noticed that a lot of people find yin-yang to be opposites, and I feel like in the world that's how we're practicing things. We see it as men versus women, right versus left. We see these extremes constantly at odds with each other. They're in opposition. And Bruce even later goes on to speak that when yin-yang are in opposition of each other and they try to stand alone, does it become evil? See, only when it abandons this position and tries to stand as an equal side by side with the positive does it become evil. So instead of being cooperative and alternating, it stands in opposition. And yeah, we are seeing that a lot, especially politically right now. We are seeing two extreme sides. And that is not really going to lead to any peace in our society. If one side wins, there's going to be tension. If one side wins over the other, there's not going to be peace at all, regardless of whether it's the extreme right or the extreme left. Those things, they can't work that way because, to be honest, I don't even really believe in this left and right political stuff. There are so many things that are too complex to say this is completely left or this is completely right. For example, one might assume environmentalism is a completely left-wing thing, right? A left-wing idea. But it's not. It's not. If you were to look at the Green Party, and this is part of the reason why the Green Party isn't as quite successful as it could be. And so when I speak of the Green Party, I'm in Canada. I don't know who would be hearing this. Maybe somebody. If you're outside of the country, I live in Canada, and we have the Green Party. And the Green Party isn't quite they're not very successful, even though people keep saying that, oh, well, how is the Green Party, like, if people care about the environment, especially the left, why isn't all of the left going to the Green Party? Well, the reason is that environmentalism isn't just a left-wing thing. Environmentalism has a lot of who you would consider on the right side. Yeah, there are actually a lot of racist people in the Green Party. I know, it's sad but true. The Green Party has a lot of more conservative platforms than the NDP party, for example. So the NDP party in Canada is the New Democratic Party. And the New Democratic Party, I would say, that's really where all the people who are left-leaning should be voting for. But they continuously would vote for for the Liberal Party. Current Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau. But they constantly vote for the Liberal Party because of this whole scare tactic of splitting the vote. Like, well, if we vote for NDP, that's a vote for the Conservative Party. And it's not true. When the Conservatives have won, it's actually been when Liberals jump party over to the Conservative Party. The NDP voters would not impact that. It's liberal voters jumping over to the conservative side. And that's the thing too, right? is you constantly have people jumping to different parties, voting for someone different. There's millions of people who do that. People who only vote for one party is only a small fraction of the population. Most people either flip-flop between parties or they're apathetic. And a lot of ideas also too of like being conservative. So being conservative is to save money. However, the way a lot of on the conservative side, on the right-wing side, try to save money is by taking money away from services. The problem with this is that they then put this money into other areas that need to be taken care of, because if they weren't taken care of, then the complete infrastructure will be messed up. And also it'd be pretty unsafe. So like one of the things is policing. So quite often what happens is the more you take out of social services like welfare and healthcare, the more you have to put into policing. And I mean like a lot more. It would actually be less money to house and feed every homeless person. It would be less money for taxpayers per year to house and feed every homeless person than it is to continue policing them the way we do. Because one of the areas also of healthcare that really we can't take money from is emergency services. And quite often those are very expensive as well. A lot of homeless people end up costing a lot in emergency services, where if other healthcare areas were taken care of and welfare was taken care of and we made sure everyone had a home and safe place to be, we would actually save a lot more money. We would conserve more money in the long run if we just put more money in other areas now, in the immediate. So, are conservatives really conserving money? No. But are there a lot of conservatives who are into environmentalism, which is conserving the environment? Absolutely. So right there, back and forth. People aren't typically one thing or the other, really. I mean, there's people who lean certain ways, definitely, but yeah. So I also wanted to say so yin-yang is not dualistic. The common mistake of the Western world is to identify these two forces, yin and yang, as dualistic. That is, yang being the opposite of yin and vice versa. At best, they see the two forces as cause and effect, but never paired like sound and echo or light and shadow. Basically, what needs to be done is that everyone on every side need to just figure out what they can do together for cooperation and alternate with things instead of being opposition to each other. Figuring out ways to use each other's strengths and weaknesses to benefit each other, right? And then there's also this part where yin-yang, it's not yin and yang. You cannot use the word and when speaking of yin-yang, as yin-yang is never two. but rather poles on one interconnected process. Just as in pedaling a bicycle, you cannot just push or not push. Unless both legs are working together, you cannot get anywhere. Neither can be omitted or separate from the other. Why do we have to use this kind of thinking? It's like trying to move an elephant by pulling it. Very unnatural. We must follow the natural course, just like the up and down of pedaling a bicycle. If you try to pedal by just pushing or by just releasing, you would get nowhere. It would never get to enjoy the beauty of the scenery outdoors. And speaking of extremes, I want to talk about truth in one area that I think is good to really focus on. Now, as I mentioned again, people change over time. And 5-10 years ago, you might have thought something or said something that you really don't actually think or believe today. Like at one time, I thought organic was better than GMO. I thought GMOs were, they were despicable and poisoning us, and organic was better. Well, the truth is that science has shown empirically over and over again that genetically modified organisms are no less or more dangerous than organic food. They might be a little less in nutrients, maybe in certain areas, but they're not unsafe. And in fact, a lot of fruits and vegetables aren't even technically organic to begin with. For example, did you know broccoli, or you can't have organic broccoli because broccoli can't even be found in the wild. Broccoli is a man-made vegetable. That means people, humans, took two other organisms and bred them together to create a new organism. They genetically modified organisms to come together to create a new organism. So technically, broccoli is a genetically modified organism by the actual definition of what it is. So, yeah, I used to have an opinion that GMOs were, bad for you, but it changed over time with science. And so that's what one passage here says. One's perspective on truth changes with change. My change there was that I got more information. I investigated. So he says of this, because I am a changing as well as an ever-growing man, thus what I hold true a couple of months ago might not be the same now. You don't have to be set in your ways. And I think that's the thing here too when it comes to politics. You don't have to be set in your ways when it comes to politics. If you are part of a political party that is ethically and morally apprehensible, you can leave. Just because you grew up in that party, just because it held values that you appreciated, but now those values have diminished, you don't have to stay there. It's not a religion. Even with religion, you don't have to stay in a religion if you change and you no longer believe. Don't be a part of it. Find a different philosophy that best suits you. I mean, Bruce Lee's philosophies, Bruce Lee was an atheist. So these are secular philosophies. And from what I've read, they're pretty damn good. And honestly, his philosophies are less scary, less dogmatic, less bossy. He just wants you to read his thoughts, his striking thoughts. Take what his opinions were, and then he wants you to investigate for yourself to form your own opinions. And you can agree or disagree with him. You can agree with him on 90% of the stuff that he's written and disagree on 10%. And that's okay, because he doesn't want you or mean for you to be completely who he is. He wants you to be your own person. You can have your own thoughts. You can have your own opinions. It's just a matter of learning how to work and cooperate with each other in order to make a world we can all live in. Well, I hope you all who have listened, if anyone has, enjoyed my rant. I hope I wasn't too obnoxious. And I hope you learned something from this. And yeah, go out there, seek knowledge, and grow as people. This has been the Podstard with the Bastard Jack.